Well, hello everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Hybrid Ministry Show. I am your host, Nick Clayson. Thrilled, excited, pumped, and jacked to be with you. Another episode in the Cross Creek mug. Listen, I'm going to take this rig back to my house at some point in time, but I brought this in because I did those Adobe and Photoshop episodes, and that was a little bit, for me, selfish and two-pronged. But for those of you not watching, I'm in my office drinking some coffee this morning. Freshly roasted Burundi from Burundi. Did it on my back patio last night. Didn't get the chaff off as much as I would have wanted to, so I'm going to be working on that here in the future. In this episode, we are going to be talking about all things Generation Alpha. Now listen, we've been talking Gen Z a lot, but we're going to shift the conversation even younger because Gen Alpha is currently thought to have been born between 2010 and 2025, meaning they're not even born all the way yet. And so we're going to talk about them a little bit. There's a few statistics and things that are interesting about them, but they're not fully formed and they're not fully developed yet. And so these are just a lot of things that may just be conjecture, things that we're looking at ahead in the future, curious about. So join me as we dive into that. And here's why, because I think that the younger generations tend to formulate and bring about formation to the older generations and the older demographics. So as always, you can head to the link in the show notes, hybridministry.xyz/057 for full transcripts. It's also going to have a link to our YouTube channel where you can subscribe, like, rate, review. A rating or review in the Purple Podcast app would be amazing. We are on Instagram. We are on TikTok. We are all the places. And link in the show notes will have your chance for a 100% completely free ebook, as well as the video transitions that you can get in Adobe Premiere Pro. Without any further ado, let's dive into why we need to look at and learn from Generation Alpha for the future of the church. Here we go. All right, so Generation Alpha, that is a new demographic, younger than Generation Z. Right, we had Generation X, Generation Y, which we have nicknamed and colloquially called the Millennials, and then Generation Z. What do you do after Z? Well, you go back to the beginning. So now we're in Generation Alpha. They may have a new name. They may have something that they're called in the future, but for right now, we are referring to them as Generation Alpha. So right now, I am a youth pastor. If you're not in youth ministry, you may feel like this isn't even a thing that is worth worrying about. But just for some frame of reference and context, right now is actually a really clear year in my mind because middle schoolers are Generation Alpha and high schoolers are Generation Z. That line, it's an arbitrary line that you draw, right, between like generations, but most researchers would draw that line, like I said, 2010. So you do a little bit of quick math, that makes it like a 13-year-old. So you're looking at 6th grade, 7th grade, maybe some 8th graders, and then 9th grade and on up, they are younger. But similarly, to look at the gap between Gen Z and Millennials, we called them, some people have called them Zillennials because they're Zers, but they're also Millennials, so they got kind of attributes of both generations. The same thing is going to be true of the lines, the edges of these arbitrary drawings. A couple of things that are worth noting that I want to share with you. I looked at an article from explodingtopics.com/blog/Generation Alpha stats. I'll drop the link to that for y'all in the show notes. Make sure you go check that out. Most of this stuff comes from there, but they have it linked to deeper research where they got their information from. So go ahead, check those things out. But children between ages of 8 and 12, okay, so that's upper elementary, lower middle, spend on average 4 hours and 44 minutes in front of screens every single day. Just think about that for a minute. 4 hours and 44 minutes. And while you may be listening to this and thinking, man, that's crazy, that's a lot. How much time are you spending in front of a screen every single day? I mean, right here is my office. I'm sitting in front of a screen. I have another screen. I have my phone. I'm in front of this 8 hours a day, right? Not to mention TVs, not to mention phones. But what really struck this chord for me, what's really making me want to dive into this a little bit more, is the actual screen itself. So we were on vacation last week. We were in Florida, and we had a TV. Just like every room in America on vacation in hotels or condos has a TV, right? And there was a problem with the TV, though, because the TV only had basic cable. My kids don't understand basic cable. So they would want to watch TV, and they would ask to watch a certain show. And I'd say, bro, I can't get that show on the TV for you. I can't make Phineas and Ferb be what they play. I don't even know if Disney Channel does Phineas and Ferb anymore. It was mostly Big City Greens is what was on. And so instead, my kids, as opposed to being like, oh, okay, like they didn't get it. They're like, well, okay, can we watch Phineas and Ferb on your iPad? So I have a 7-year-old and a 4-year-old. And so one of them adopted my iPad and one of them adopted my wife's iPad. One of them watched Phineas and Ferb. One of them watched Mickey Mouse Funhouse. Meanwhile, in the master bedroom where my wife and I were staying, the TV in there, I couldn't get it to work. And I host a podcast about hybrid ministry. So you'd think I, of all people, should be able to get this thing to work. When I couldn't, my wife was like, well, it's a lost cause. So since I couldn't, the two of us also were just like on our phones, right? Like at the time of the vacation, and you know, we're going to be a month in advance or so on this when I actually post, but it was NBA free agency. So I was like checking Woj notifications, if you know, Shams notifications from The Athletic, and just watching like YouTube and podcasts and things like that as they're, you know, analyzing the Fred VanVleet signing in Houston and Dylan Brooks and in Houston and, you know, Chris Middleton back to the Bucks and all these things, right? So I'm just watching it on my phone. My wife's, you know, she's over there on Reels. That's her normal anyway. She's not a big like TV person. She's more like scroll some Reels, you know, for her like entertainment, so to speak. So the four of us, my wife and I and my two kids, all of us were on screens, but not the biggest screen, not the TV screen. And I think to me, it was like just this eye-opening moment. First of all, I can't even go on vacation without thinking about this podcast, right? But it was this kind of like eye-opening moment. Like, man, none of us are watching TV. We're all just on smaller screens. What does this mean? So it caused me to just start asking some questions about the younger generation, Gen Alpha. I think that these are going to be related to Generation Z as well. So I want to share with you all a couple of stats. So let's go ahead and take a minute, dive into what some of these fascinating Generation Alpha stats are. Let's go. All right, so like I said, according to the exploringtopics.com blog, here are some of the stats from Generation Alpha. 47% of Gen Alpha say that they prefer to split their free time between screen time and being outdoors. 47%. So right about half prefer screen time and outdoors. And I think like if I were to inspect that and ask some questions about it a little bit, really what I'm saying is like indoors equals screen time and outdoors equals outdoors, which is, you know, normal. The question is like, are there things inside that Gen Alpha are navigating, using, spending time on that are not screen based? The next thing I want to show you is it says Gen Alpha use an average of 4.2 streaming services. That's Gen Alpha. Frankly, I use Disney Plus, I use Discovery Plus, I use Netflix sometimes. I use Prime sometimes. I use Hulu sometimes. I stream off the ESPN app. Sometimes I use like Sling. I mean, I'm up to 7. So while you're like, man, that might sound like a lot, I don't think it actually sounds like a lot at all. I have tons of different streaming services. And quite frankly, I've cut the cord with cable years ago. And every time I go on vacation, I'm reminded like, yeah, I don't want cable. Like that's not what I want, right? Like I enjoy my streaming services. Part of the problem now is streaming services, you add all the costs together, it's just as much as cable or more. And so I'm like, I don't know if this is actually saving me any money because there's enough platforms out there now that they're diversified across all of them, you know. Additionally, 59% of Gen Alphas say that watching TV and movies is their favorite weekend activity. 50% name it as their favorite after-school activity, and 70% of 8 to 11-year-olds consider TV and movies to be among their favorite activities. So just think about that. Screen time, Gen Z, all that stuff is part of what, how they're spending their time on screens. It is wild. And lastly, 38% of Gen Alpha gamers want a video game that allows them to build or create. And I think there's something there. Talking about Minecraft, talking about Roblox types of games. They like to be contributors and creators to the moment, not just passive consumers. My kids, they watch some YouTube. We have YouTube Kids. We try to have all the blocks that we can, keep them safe out there on the internet. But my son has recently gotten into watching people play video games. And I'm like, bro, why don't you play a video game yourself? So this weekend I downloaded Mario Kart so that we could have some family Mario Kart battles, which has been pretty fun. But it's kind of like my kids, 7 and 4-year-olds, kind of their first time ever playing video games, right? And so they're now getting to experience what it's actually like to play it. And then I got home from church yesterday, and man, they had been playing it for hours up to that point. So pretty fun, pretty exciting times. But what does all of this stuff mean? So let's dive in to talk about some big ideas and pictures of what this might mean for the church going forward. All right, so let's talk about what this might mean for the idea of the future church. So philosophically speaking, as you're listening to this, you might be thinking, Gen Alpha, I don't have to care about that. I don't have to worry about that. I'm not in youth ministry. And while that may be true, because even some of these kids aren't even born yet, right? Gen Alpha, the lines I've read are 2010 to 2025 birth years. We're in 2023 at the time of this recording, so there's still 2 more years of Gen Alphas to be born, to be popping out of people, right? So what does this mean, you might be thinking? And here's why I think this matters, because philosophically, churches and cultures tend to gravitate towards youth. Watch any movie on Hollywood, watch any movie on TV, like the main character you're going to find is somebody who is young. And so younger generations tend to kind of carry the weight and carry the day as it pertains to culture and culture building. Youth shapes culture. So if youth shapes culture, then we need to look at what the youth and what the younger people are doing, gravitating towards, what the trends are, and then what this might mean for us as a church going forward. Because here's what's going to happen. If not, we're going to become less relevant. We're going to become more antiquated. And if we are, not because we're trying to attract people and make Jesus attractive, but because we're trying to be, as Paul said, I become a Jew for Jews, a Greek for Greeks, so that I may win some in accordance and for the sake of the gospel. And so that's what we're going to do. We're going to try and meet people and reach people where they are spending their time. So philosophically speaking, culture tends to trend younger. So what does that mean? And what are some of the things that we can just right now look at, grab, and move forward? Let's go ahead and take a look at that. So practically speaking, I have 3 practical ideas for churches. So the first thing is make things optimized for your phone. Listen, if your website is already not optimized for a phone, like you need to probably stop listening to this right now and go make that happen ASAP. That is a very crucial and very important part of ministry, I think, in 2023 and beyond. Also, what are ways in which you can invade the phone, not in a creepy way, but in a meaningful way, to generations that are not at church in the moment, right? So like both, how can they engage with it at church? So one of my favorite things is the YouVersion Bible app, the notes section where they can take notes, follow along. But also like Bible reading plans, short form video based content pieces for social media, TikTok, Reels, Shorts that are both funny, fun, relevant, and biblical, and things that are going to help them like grow more as a disciple and as a follower of Jesus. So both, what can you do for phones in person, and what can you do for phones while they're not there? The other thing I think that is worthwhile is, as much screen time as people are spending, how can we as a church offer for them moments not on screens at church? So like we most recently went to summer camp a couple weeks ago, and we offered and challenged our students to adopt the low cell / no cell challenge. And we rewarded students who took part in that because we thought they would get more out of camp if they were on their phones less as opposed to more. But here's the thing. We didn't just do a blanket no cell phone policy, because kids use their phones for alarms. Kids use their phones for cameras. Kids use their phones for all kinds of different things. And quite frankly, so do you. And so do I. Like, my phone is my GPS. My phone is my day timer. My phone is my, like, you know, I got a question, look it up. Like, my phone is a lot of things to me. And I think that's part of the problem, is we a lot of times equate screen time to just simply social media, when in the reality, screen time is a lot of things. Like, when I travel, my screen time goes through the roof. Not because I'm spending more time on my phones at my vacation destination, but because I'm traveling and I got my Maps app open the whole time and my screen is counting that against me. The second thing is, can you incorporate video games? Students are spending more and more time on video games. So both, that could be like in your environment, especially if you're a youth pastor. That's not a foreign idea. It's been around for years. Honestly, I grew up in a ministry that had video games offered to me as a teenager. But can you also maybe incorporate video games in things like Twitch streams or YouTube gaming, like those types of things? And can you use that to both let students watch and view and participate in from a passive viewer perspective, and or can you flip that script and give them opportunities, platforms, times to come in, stream things? Like, can you find a way to incorporate that into your ministry to create a wider pool and a wider reach? Because just think about this. If you invite someone in to stream on one of your platforms, they're going to cross-promote that. They're going to tell their friends that they're online, like all kinds of fun stuff like that. So start thinking and asking yourself, are there ways to incorporate video games? That's one of the ways that Gen Alpha is using it, especially things like Minecraft and Roblox. One of the things that I thought was awesome during COVID, we built a dedicated, for our own student ministry, Minecraft server. And it was really cool. Like, it was a really cool thing. COVID and our leaders not really getting it and getting into it helped it, not have as much traction as I think it could have, maybe should have. But things like that are so cool, so niche. Are there ways to utilize that for the advancement of your student ministry culture, advancement of the name of Jesus, the gospel, all those types of things I think are worth questioning. And the third thing is, I think we need to start discipling students through it and not away from it. If you're anything like me, you've grown up in, early 90s, mid 2000s, almost all of the things were like challenging students to lay things aside, like turn your phone into a dumb phone, all these things. And I think those are good things. I think if you feel so inclined to do that personally, then you should do that. But I think, like I said, phones are not going anywhere, right? But how do we help disciple people through it? Because they have it, right? Like, I'll just say this as a parent, I am going to hold off on getting my kids a phone for as long as humanly possible. I say that right now when they're 7 and 4. I can't tell you what it's going to be like in 5 years or 7 years and where they're at with that. But I don't want them to have a phone because there are dangers on there, that pornography, addiction, things like that, all can stem from a simple device in your pocket. That being said, many of our people have them. So how do we help navigate them through it? How do we help create within them good digital hygiene, good practices to navigating having a phone and living in the World Wide Web in the 21st century, and using it for good and using it to reach people for the gospel? So I think that's a shift that the church needs to start moving towards, is less, hey, cut it off, go cold turkey. Instead, hey, you have it, but with it, here's how you can use it. Well, hey, everyone, thanks so much for sticking around to the end of this episode. I hope you found it helpful. As always, link in the show notes for transcripts, links to the YouTube video if you want to watch that, and TikTok, Instagram, YouTube Shorts, all those things. Go like, follow, subscribe, all the places. We love hanging out with y'all. If you have a question, head to our website, hybridministry.xyz, and send us a question. We would love to answer it here on the pod at some point in the future. And don't forget, we got a couple freebies in the show notes as well. So go to the show notes. That is going to be your one-stop shop for everything that you need. And don't forget, and as always, stay hybrid.